Police told Los Angeles to lock their windows. The killer preferred if you didn't. Summer 1985, the city that never sleeps, couldn't sleep for a different reason. Someone was walking through unlocked doors, climbing through pet flaps, removing window screens with the patience of a professional burglar and the appetite of something much worse. He left calling cards, distinctive shoe prints in flower beds, pentagrams carved into the walls, and bodies arranged like offerings to something that didn't belong in suburban bedrooms. The media called him the Night Stalker. He called himself a servant of Satan. When they finally caught him, he flashed a pentagram drawn on his palm and screamed, "Hail Satan." At sentencing, he told the judge, "I am beyond good and evil. Lucifer dwells in us all." But here's the question that haunted investigators for decades. Was Richard Ramirez born to kill? Or was he manufactured by a perfect storm of brain damage, trauma, and one very twisted mentor? Because when you dig into his childhood, you'll find that the devil didn't make Richard Ramirez do it. Something much closer to home did. (1984 to 1985), Los Angeles County. A drifter named Ricardo Muñoz Ramírez, 25 years old, gap-toothed grin, long black hair, was turning the American dream into a waking nightmare. He didn't stick to one type of victim or one method of killing. Elderly women, young couples, entire families, it didn't matter. Shooting, stabbing, beating, sexual assault, all in the same evening's work. The only consistency was the terror. 14 confirmed murders across a dozen different neighbourhoods. No pattern police could predict, no profile that made sense. Just a man who moved through the night like smoke, leaving shoe prints and corpses in equal measure. And when it was all over, when they finally dragged him off the streets of East LA, the question wasn't just, how did he do it? It was, how the fuck did we create this thing? Let's start at the beginning, because Richard Ramirez didn't just wake up one morning and decide to become LA's most feared serial killer. He was built for it, piece by piece, trauma by trauma. February 29th, 1960, El Paso, Texas. Leap year baby Ricardo Muñoz Ramírez enters the world into a family that's already fractured. His father, Julian, works the railroad and has a temper that makes freight trains seem gentle. His mother, Mercedes, is devoutly religious, the kind of Catholic faith that comes with equal parts prayer and fear. By all accounts, Richard was a weird kid even before life started properly fucking him up. Quiet, withdrawn, prone to violent outbursts that seem to come from nowhere. But here's where it gets interesting. From a born to kill perspective, the head injuries, multiple skull fractures before age 12, we're talking about serious brain trauma during the most critical development years, falls, accidents, impacts that left him with epileptic seizures and behavioural changes that his family couldn't understand. Now, I'm not saying brain damage automatically creates serial killers. Plenty of people suffer from head traumas and don't turn into homicidal maniacs. But when you combine frontal lobe damage with the right environmental factors, well, you get Richard Ramirez. Enter Miguel Ramirez, Mike, to his friends. Richard's older cousin, recently returned from Vietnam with a head full of war stories and a camera full of something much worse. Mike had been a Green Beret in Vietnam, decorated soldier, expert marksman, trained in stealth and killing. But Mike brought more than just war stories back to El Paso. He brought photographs, Polaroids of Vietnamese women he'd raped and murdered, trophies from a war that had turned him into something inhuman, and he showed them to his 12-year-old cousin Richard. Okay, picture this. You're a kid with an already damaged brain, grown up in a violent household, and your cool older cousin, the family war hero, is showing you photographs of women he's tortured and killed, telling you stories about the thrill of domination, the power of absolute control over another human being. Mike didn't just tell Richard these stories, he acted them out. He taught him how to move silently, how to approach victims, how to use stealth as a weapon. He was essentially running a masterclass in sexual violence with a brain-damaged 12-year-old as his star pupil. But the real turning point, the moment that probably sealed Richard's fate, happened on May the 4th, 1973. Richard, now 13, is at Mike's house when Mike's wife Jessie confronts him about his behaviour, his drinking, his violent outbursts since returning from Vietnam. Mike pulls out his .38 revolver and shoots Jessie in the face. Richard watches his cousin murder his wife in cold blood, sees the life drain out of her eyes, and watches Mike just stand over a body without a trace of remorse. Mike was arrested, tried, and found not guilty by reason of insanity. PTSD they called it, combat stress. He served 4 years in a mental institution and was released. Richard? Well, Richard learned that violence was not only acceptable, it could be justified. It could be explained away. It could even be celebrated if you were good enough at it. The rest of Richard's adolescence reads like a textbook case of serial killer development. Drug use escalating from marijuana to cocaine to PCP. Petty crime graduating to burglary, and always the nighttime prowling. You see, he developed a taste for breaking into houses while people slept. Not just for theft, though he did steal, but for the thrill of being in someone's private space while they were vulnerable. He would stand in bedrooms, watching people sleep, getting off on the power, the control, the knowledge that he could kill them and they'd never even know he was there. By his late teens, Richard had already developed an obsession with Satanism. Now, before you roll your eyes at another "devil made me do it" story, understand that for Richard, Satan wasn't about religion, it was about rebellion, about power, about giving himself permission to do what he was already wanting to do. He became obsessed with AC/DC, particularly with their album Highway to Hell and the track Night Prowler. The lyrics weren't just music to him, they were instructions, a playbook for the kind of predator he was becoming. Was that a noise outside your window? What's that shadow on the blind? As you lie there naked like a body in the tomb, suspended animation as I slip into your room. So, by 1984, you've got a 24-year-old Richard Ramirez with brain damage, a history of seizures, severe drug addiction, years of burglary experience, and a head full of lessons learned from a murderous war veteran who taught him that women exist to be dominated, and that killing can just be justified. Oh, and he believes he's doing Satan's work. The only question left was, where would he start? Los Angeles, 1984. The city of angels was about to meet its demon. Richard had drifted west from Texas, drawn by the sprawling suburbs, the unlocked doors, the endless supply of potential victims living in blissful ignorance behind their picture windows and sliding glass doors. June 28th, 1984, Castle Park. 79-year-old Ginny Vincow is asleep in her apartment when someone removes the screen from her bedroom window and climbs inside. She wakes to find a gaunt figure standing over her bed. Her throat is slashed so violently she's nearly decapitated. Police find no witnesses, no obvious motive, no clear evidence, except for one thing, a fingerprint on the removed window screen. But in 1984, fingerprint databases are limited and Richard Ramirez isn't even in the system yet. The Vincow murder goes unsolved, filed away as a random killing in a city that sees plenty of them. Richard, meanwhile, has discovered something intoxicating. The thrill of murder makes burglary feel like child's play. For months, he hones his technique, breaking into homes, stealing small items, but always escalating. The violence becomes more elaborate, more sexual, more ritualistic. Then comes 1985, and Richard Ramirez stops practicing, then starts performing. March 17th, 1985, Rosemead. A 34-year-old Dale Okazaki and her roommate Maria Hernandez return home from dinner around 11:30 p.m. As they pull into their garage, a figure emerges from the shadows. Maria sees him first, tall, thin, wild hair, and wearing all black. She throws up her hands instinctively as he raises a .22 caliber pistol and fires. The bullet passes through her hands and grazes her forehead. She falls, laying dead. Maria would later testify, "I saw his face clearly. I will never forget those eyes. They weren't human eyes." Richard steps over Maria's body and walks into the house. While Dale Okazaki is cowering in the kitchen. One shot to the forehead, execution style. He rifles through her purse, takes jewellery and disappears into the night. But he leaves behind something interesting. An AC/DC baseball cap. The band that had provided him the soundtrack to his transformation was now part of his signature. Less than an hour later, same night, Monterey Park, about 10 minutes away. Desai Lian Veronica Yu is sitting in her car outside her condo when someone approaches her window. One shot to the head. She dies instantly. 2 attacks, one night, different weapons, different approaches. Police don't immediately connect them, but they're looking at someone who's comfortable with violence, who moves quickly between locations, who kills without hesitation. They just don't realise they're looking at someone who's just getting started. March 27th, Vincent and Maxine Zazara, home invasion. Both shot. Maxine sexually assaulted post-mortem. Vincent's eyes gouged out. But here's what gets investigators' attention. A distinctive footprint in the flower bed outside their bedroom window. Avia Arabic sneakers, size 11.5. Not exactly rare, but distinctive enough when the same print shows up at the next crime scene and the next one. Detectives start to realise they're dealing with a serial killer. May 14th, William Doe, Monterey Park. Shot through the head while his invalid wife watches helplessly from her wheelchair. May 29th, Monrovia. 83-year-old Mabel Bell and her 80-year-old sister Florence Lang. Bell is beaten to death with a hammer. Lang survives with severe injuries. And here's where Richard really starts to embrace his satanic persona. Investigators find pentagrams drawn in lipstick on Bell's thigh and on the bedroom wall. A calling card that sends shockwaves through a city already terrified by the randomness of attacks. The media, they dub him the Night Stalker, the Valley Intruder, the Walking Killer. Every name captures a different aspect of the terror. He strikes at night, he goes where he's not wanted, he walks into homes like he owns them, and the attacks keep escalating. July 2nd, Mary Louise Cannon, 75, Arcadia, beaten with a hammer. July 5th, Whitney Bennett, Sierra Madre, beaten with a tire iron, survives. July 17th, Sophie Dickman, 63, Monterey Park, sexually assaulted, survives. July 20th, Maxon and Leela Needlam, 68 and 66, Glendale, both shot, house ransacked. By now, police departments across Los Angeles counties are forming joint task forces, sharing information, coordinating patrols. The area shoe print is appearing at scene after scene. Ballistics connect multiple murders to the same weapons. The pattern is clear. One killer, moving systematically through suburban neighbourhoods, getting bolder with each attack, but they still don't have a face to put to the footprint. August the 6th, Northridge, Christopher and Virginia Peterson, both shot but survive. Richard is becoming careless, leaving more evidence, taking bigger risks. August the 8th, Diamond Bar, Ahmed Zia, 35, shot while his wife is sexually assaulted upstairs. August the 17th, San Francisco. Richard expands his hunting ground north. Peter Pan, 66, shot dead. Barbara Pran survives but is beaten and sexually assaulted. The San Francisco attack proves that it isn't just an LA problem. The Night Stalker can strike anywhere along the California coast. No one is safe. But Richard's expansion would ultimately lead to his downfall. By August 1985, the Night Stalker Task Force is the largest manhunt in Los Angeles history. Over 200 detectives from multiple agencies working around the clock, following up on thousands of tips from a terrified public. But they're chasing a ghost. Richard Ramirez moves like smoke, strikes without pattern, leaves minimal evidence except those maddening aviar footprints and the ballistic signatures from his small arsenal of weapons. The breakthrough comes from a technology that sounds like science fiction but is becoming cutting-edge police work: laser-enhanced fingerprint analysis. August 25th, Mission Viejo. Richard attacks a 29-year-old Bill Carnes and his fiancée. Carnes is shot 3 times in the head but survives. His fiancée is raped and forced to swear on Satan as she won't look at Richard's face, but she does look, and she sees him clearly enough to help police create their most detailed composite sketch yet. Most importantly, as Richard flees the scene, a teenager in the neighbourhood noticed something: an orange station wagon parked where it shouldn't be, with a partial license plate he manages to memorise. Police locate the car, a 1976 orange Toyota station wagon, license plate 482 RTS. It's been abandoned in a Rampart District parking lot, wiped clean of obvious prints. But clean in 1985 doesn't mean what it used to. Orange County criminalists transport the Toyota to a specially equipped shed where they subject every surface to analysis, essentially filling the car with superglue vapor that adheres to the oils and fingerprints, making them visible under special lighting. Then comes the $35,000 argon iron laser, sweeping the treated surfaces with blue-green light that makes enhanced print fluorescence yellow-white against the dark interior. And there it is, one perfect thumbprint on the rearview mirror that Richard thought he wiped clean. The print goes into a computer system and, within hours, they have a match. Richard Ramirez, 25 years old, arrested in December 1984 for auto theft. They finally have a name to go with the shoe print. August 30th, 1985, police release Richard's photograph to the media. The gaunt face, the wild hair, the gap-toothed smile that has terrified so many victims. Suddenly, the Night Stalker isn't a shadow anymore. He's a man with an address, a history, a face that thousands of people are now searching for. The media circus is immediate and massive. Richard Ramirez becomes the most famous face in America overnight. His photograph is on every front page, every newscast, every convenience store bulletin board. Teams of officers raid his known associates, search his last known addresses, canvass the area where he's been spotted. But Richard has vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. The manhunt expands beyond Los Angeles, beyond California. The FBI joins the search. Border crossings are monitored, airports are watched, but Richard Ramirez isn't running. He's hiding in plain sight, sleeping rough in downtown LA, completely unaware that his face is plastered across every newspaper in the city. Until the morning of August 31st, when he walks into a liquor store in East LA and sees himself staring back from a stack of Spanish language newspapers. The headline reads, "Aquí está el matador." Here is the killer. Richard realizes that his reign of terror is over, but the most dangerous moment in any manhunt is when the predator knows he's been cornered. Think, you're Richard Ramirez. You've just realized the entire city is now hunting you, and your face is on every newspaper from Tijuana to San Francisco. What do? If you're a rational person, you'll probably turn yourself in, maybe call a lawyer, try to negotiate some kind of deal. But if you're Richard Ramirez, you try and steal a car in broad daylight from a neighbourhood that's been in living terror of you for over a year. 8 AM, East LA. Richard spots a red Ford Mustang in a residential driveway. The owner, Pristino Pinon is working under the hood. Richard approaches, demands the keys. Pinon doesn't recognise him immediately. Richard looks different without the wild hair and the all-black clothing. Thinner, desperate, strung out. But when Pinon refuses to hand over the keys, Richard becomes violent. He strikes Pinon with a metal bar, tries to drag him away from the car. But Pinon fights back. His shouts attract attention from neighbours who've been on edge for months looking for exactly this kind of trouble. Suddenly, windows are opening, doors are slamming, and voices are shouting in Spanish, Es el matador. It's him, it's the killer. Richard abandons the Mustang and runs, but now he's got an entire neighbourhood chasing him. These aren't random bystanders, these are people who've been afraid to sleep with their windows open, who's been checking locks 3 times before bed, who's been living in fear of this exact man for over a year. He tries to carjack another vehicle. The owner, Angelina de la Toro, is getting out of her car when Richard grabs her, tries to pull her back inside, but de la Toro's husband Manuel sees what's happening and comes running with a steel fence post. Now, you've got Richard Ramirez, the night stalker who's terrorized an entire city, being chased through residential streets by an angry mob of citizens armed with whatever they could grab from their garage. He tries to flee on foot, but the neighbourhood has surrounded him. Manuel de la Toro catches him first, swinging his steel rod like a baseball bat. Other neighbours join in. Jose Bion with a pipe, others with sticks, tools, whatever they could find. By the time police arrive, Richard is on the ground, bleeding from multiple head wounds, barely conscious, with about 15 very angry residents standing over him making sure he doesn't move. Officer Andre Ramirez, no relation, is on the scene first. He finds Richard curled up under a pile of residents, beaten but alive. As he puts on the handcuffs, Richard reportedly says, "Thank God you came. They were going to kill me." You see, the man who's shown no mercy to his victims, who's tortured and murdered 14 people, was grateful to be saved from the same neighbourhood justice he's been dealing out. Richard is transported to LAPD headquarters, where detectives have been waiting for this very moment for over a year. They've got hundreds of questions, thousands of pieces of evidence to connect, dozens of crime scenes to link to the man they finally caught. Richard isn't talking. He's lawyered up immediately, refuses to collaborate, acts like the whole thing is a inconvenience rather than the end of one of the most terrifying crime sprees in American history. What Richard doesn't realise is that they don't need a confession. They've got his fingerprints at multiple scenes, ballistics matches from his weapons, surviving victims who can identify him, and that trail of aviar footprints connecting him to attack after attack. The case against Richard Ramirez isn't just strong, it's overwhelming. If you thought the manhunt was a media circus, the trial of Richard Ramirez was a full-blown satanic panic spectacular. October 24th, 1985, Los Angeles County Superior Court. Richard's arraignment on multiple murder charges. The courtroom is packed with media, victims' families, curiosity seekers hoping to get a look at the night stalker in person. Richard enters wearing shackles and an orange jumpsuit, his long black hair hanging over his face. First the charges are read: 13 counts of murder, 30 other felonies including rape, burglary and assault. Richard does something that sends shockwaves through the courtroom. He raises his left hand, revealing a pentagram drawn on his palm in black ink, and shouts, "Hail Satan." The courtroom erupts, camera flashes pop like strobe lights, reporters scramble for quotes, victim families gasp or cry out, and Richard just sits there with that gap-toothed grin, enjoying every second of the chaos he's created. This single moment transformed the trial from a criminal proceeding into a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, it's not just about murder, it's about good versus evil, God versus the devil, the soul of America itself. The satanic angle dominates coverage. Reports focus on the pentagrams found at crime scenes, Richard's "Hail Satan" outbursts, his obsession with AC/DC and occult symbolism. The trial becomes a lightning rod for religious conservatives who see Richard as a proof of Satan's influence in American society. But prosecutor Philip Halpin keeps the focus on the evidence. The avowed footprint, the ballistic matches, the fingerprint evidence, the surviving victims who can identify Richard in person. Maria Hernandez, who survived the Rosemead shootings, takes the stand. She points directly at Richard and says, "That's him. That's the man who shot me." Her testimony is calm, detailed, devastating. Other survivors follow. Each identified chips away at any possible defense strategy except the obvious one: mental illness. Richard's defense team tries to argue diminished capacity, the head injuries, the drug use, the traumatic childhood. They bring in psychiatrists who testify about brain damage and its effects on impulse control and empathy. But Richard himself undermines their strategy at every turn. He continues his satanic performances throughout the trial, drawing pentagrams on legal documents, making devil horns with his fingers during testimony. At one point, he shouts at a prosecutor, "You're wrong. I don't belong in this courtroom. I belong in hell." His behaviour makes it impossible to argue that he doesn't understand right from wrong. He's not insane, he's just evil, and he wants everyone to know it. The prosecution methodically connects Richard to crime after crime, the fingerprint on Jenny Vincal's window screen linking him to the very first murder, DNA evidence from sexual assault, stolen property found in his possession, surviving victims who described his distinctive appearance and behaviour. Most damning of all, the weapons. Richard had used the same 4 handguns across multiple attacks, creating a ballistics trail that connected seemingly random murders across Los Angeles County. September the 20th, 1989. After deliberating for 4 days, the jury returns with their victim. Guilty on all counts, 13 murders, 30 other felonies. The evidence was simply overwhelming, but the real drama, it comes during the penalty phase, when the same jury has to decide whether Richard lives or dies. October the 4th, 1989, the jury recommends death. Richard shows no emotion as the verdict is read, just that same gap-toothed smile that had terrified so many victims. November the 7th, 1989, Judge Michael Tainan formally sentences Richard to death, calling his crimes cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Richard's response becomes legendary in criminal justice circles. He stands up, looks directly at the judge, and delivers a rambling monologue that sounds like something out of a horror movie. "You don't understand me. You are not expected to. I am beyond your experience. I am beyond good and evil. I will be avenged. Lucifer dwells in us all. That is it." And then he sits down like he's just ordered a coffee. Richard Ramirez spent the next 23 years on San Quentin's death row, filing appeals, giving interviews, and receiving love letters from women who found his evil charismatic. June the 7th, 2013, Richard dies of complications from B-cell lymphoma, taking his secrets to whatever afterlife awaited him. He was 53 years old and had never shown remorse for any of his crimes. But his death doesn't answer the question we started with. Was Richard Ramirez born to kill? Let's examine the evidence objectively. So, you've got a kid born with neurological vulnerabilities, the seizures, the head trauma, the development issues that affected his impulse control and capacity for empathy. Frontal lobe damage during critical development years can absolutely contribute to violent behaviour. It doesn't excuse it, but it's a factor that we just can't ignore when trying to understand how someone becomes capable of extreme cruelty. Then you add the environmental factors, an abusive household, exposure to violence as normal behaviour, a family culture that normalised aggression as problem solving. But plenty of kids grow up in violent homes and don't become serial killers. Plenty of people suffer head injuries and don't torture their neighbours. So, what made Richard different? Miguel Ramirez, Richard's cousin, didn't just expose him to violence, he taught him that sexual sadism was not only acceptable but admirable. He provided both the psychological permission and the practical training for what Richard would later become. You see, Miguel taught Richard that stealth was power, that surprise was control, that domination was pleasure. Every technique Richard used during his Night Stalker spree could be traced back to the lessons learned from his war veteran cousin. But here's what's most disturbing about Richard's case: the performance aspect, the satanic imagery, the Hail Satan outbursts, the pentagrams that weren't religious beliefs, they were theatre. You see, Richard understood that in 1980s America, nothing would terrify middle-class suburbanites more than the idea that Satan himself was walking through their neighbourhoods. He weaponized their fear of the occult to maximize the psychological impact of his crimes. The variety of his methods, shooting, stabbing, beating, sexual assault, it shows someone who killed for pleasure, not compulsion. He wasn't driven by uncontrollable urges. He was making deliberate choices to cause maximum suffering. So, was he born to kill? The honest answer is, probably not. Richard Ramirez was manufactured, built piece by piece through a combination of biological vulnerabilities, environmental trauma, and the one very specific mentor who taught him that violence wasn't just acceptable, it was admirable. Take away the head injuries and you might have had a troubled kid who just grew out of it all. Take away Miguel's influence and the neurological damage might have manifested as impulse control problems or learning disabilities instead of homicidal sadianism. Take away the drugs and the satanic posturing and you might have had a kid someone who could distinguish between fantasy and reality. But combine all of those factors in one person and you get Richard Ramirez. You get someone who views other human beings as toys, who sees suffering as entertainment, who believes that power over life and death makes him more godlike. The Night Stalker wasn't born, he was created. By brain damage, by family violence, by a twisted mentor, and by his own choices to embrace the darkness instead of fighting it. 14 people died because Richard Ramirez decided that his trauma gave him permission to traumatize others, because his pain justified causing more pain, because his damage was more important than everyone else's right to live safely in their homes. Miguel Ramirez pulled the trigger that killed his wife in front of a 13-year-old Richard, but Richard Ramirez pulled the triggers that killed 14 innocent people who never hurt anyone. In the end, the question isn't whether he was born to kill, the question is, how many other damaged kids are out there right now, learning from the wrong mentors, making the wrong choices, walking down the same path that led Richard Ramirez to become the Night Stalker. Because somewhere out there, in some quiet suburban neighbourhood, another window screen is being removed, another footprint is being left in a flower bed, another monster is being born, and we probably won't know about it until it's far too late. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the psychology of evil, make sure to subscribe for more Boyzilla content. And if you hear someone prowling around your house at night, maybe check the locks. The Night Stalker is dead, but his methods are external. Sweet dreams, everyone.